if you're here, you are here to share in conversation around composting. So leveling up our home composting practices. My name is Kate Stevens. I am an educator, a gardener, a composter, usually in that order, sometimes the reverse order. And if you're here today, also just to remind you that you are consenting to our recording. We are recording our call today so it can be posted on the Food Waste Prevention website. So just a heads up about that. And before we get started, we have to give a shout out to Food Waste Prevention Week, an organization, nonprofit, that is raising awareness about not just food waste prevention, but also ways that we can combat, deal with, have our communities be a part of the resources to preventing food waste. So big shout out to this fabulous organization. We wouldn't be here without them. Definitely check out their website, their socials, sign up for their newsletter. There are great things happening all week with this organization as well as year round. So today, our purpose, my hope is that you are here because you're trying to produce black garden gold, that compost. And the video I'm showing you, the videos you'll see in this presentation are all our videos. They're not stock photos. But it was many moons till I was able to create consistently rich, earthy, beautiful compost like what you're seeing in that video. So I've been there, I've been on the struggle bus, and I'm happy to share some things that have worked for me. So my hope is that you'll leave here with new ideas, some practical tips and tricks. I think most importantly, an optimistic outlook on home composting. So our overview, what we're doing, a little bit of grounding and just where we are literally and figuratively. Big 30,000 foot overview of composting methods, and hopefully finding some things today that will work better for you, work for you, maybe your community. These days, I really specialize in bokashi composting. So we'll spend a good chunk of time talking about that, as well as some community approaches to community composting. And then hopefully we'll have time for just a quick chat about some home upcycling, some home repurposing and reusing, and some time for community conversation and Q&A. So hello again, I'm Kate Stevens. You can call me Kate. I'm coming into you from Colorado in Fort Collins, about an hour north of Denver. And these days, my wife and I own a small business called Garden of Oz, which you saw our logo. We started this business about 2.5 years ago. Garden of Oz focuses on waste diversion and upcycling, locally grown ingredients, and we specialize in diverting brewing industry byproducts. So from kind of farm to malt house to the brewery to the brewer spent grain, this whole life cycle of these grains, we are really committed to those byproducts and finding new life for them, as well as educating around usability and upcycling. So passionate about food waste, passionate about composting, and certainly a home gardener. I never thought I would be a small business owner. I'm actually classically a teacher by training. I've been a public school teacher since about 2010. Currently very part-time as a teacher. Here's some of my kiddos from our garden club. So I get to do some cool things like that at my site these days. Helped them start a garden a couple years ago. So we do garden club and their eco literacy program I do some support with, as well as some other duties as assigned as a teacher. And today, we're going to get into it and get you to this place where you can start, mastering your own compost practice. But what really helped me as we're starting today is if in the chat you could tell me on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being expert, and please don't feel like you need to be humble. If you've got the expertise, let us know. So 5 being an expert, 1 being a novice, what's your prior composting knowledge right now? So if you could go ahead and just put that in the chat. Lovely, lovely. Great. And then my other question for you, maybe some of you will recognize this is the golden circle made famous by Simon Sinek. And the golden circle always, advises us to start from our why and work outwards versus starting with the what and going in. So as you're coming into this today, and you have some other experts on the call, and everyone's experience, I think, is so critical to sharing tips and tricks and what's working for your climate. Because Alaska, I'm guessing your climate's going to be a little different than our folks in California. But that why, like really starting with your core purpose for why you're here and what you want to get out of this, just take a moment to reflect on that. What is your why today? What is your purpose? What are you hoping to get, not just from this, but maybe that bigger piece or that bigger goal of your composting practice? And I invite you to share that in just a couple of words in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor chat as I'm talking, but we have a lot to get through, so we'll try and save most of our questions for the end. But I want, to have people with this common interest and so much expertise around the country in one place. It would be great for us to connect a little bit with each other. So if you would share just a couple words, what is your why? What's your starting point today? Maybe your why is you're just trying to spend less on bagged soil every spring, bagged compost. Or maybe your why is you're just trying to be better about your food waste prevention. But what is your why? Saving money, educating others, hate throwing food away. Got a vermicomposter in the chat. Love it. Cutting down on waste. I think we've all kind of gotten to that point, one way or another, where you're taking the trash bag out and it's 2/3 full of food waste, or half full of food waste, or maybe it's the fridge clean out and it's all full of food waste, and it just feels like crap to throw a bag of food away in the trash. Which brings me to, and thank you for sharing that, I really do appreciate seeing where you're coming from, brings me to just kind of a look at an average landfill. So you already have reasons for why you want to compost and why you want to be a composter, so I don't have to sell this too hard to you. This is data from my county's landfill, Larimer County landfill. So it encompasses 2 cities as well as some smaller communities. And every landfill, we're really good at knowing what is in the landfill. We have studies, we have audits, we got it. And Larimer County landfill is very average. So from our landfill, from the last time that data was available, just a couple years ago, 38% of our landfill is made up of what they consider recyclables. Now, a big chunk of that includes paper products, cardboard. If you're already skipping ahead, things that we could potentially be composting. 23, I've actually seen to 25%. Our food scraps, 21% yard trimmings, think your leaves, your grass clippings, and then 18% just straight trash. So actually, about the average landfill is 51% organic waste. If we take that recyclable category and remember that there's paper products in there, 51% organic waste. And I'd be willing to get that's a lot of our home waste stream as well. So as we're thinking about some of our whys for composting and just thinking about our landfill, and of note, my local county's landfill will actually be full in just another few months, maybe a year max. It's hard to imagine landfills just being full, but that's popping up all over the world. But why compost? So, just to hit you with some of the factual things that people really love about composting: water retention, soil regeneration, putting life and organic matter and diversity back into our soils, improving plant resistance to disease. I'm sure we have gardeners in the chat. That maybe is why you're coming to composting, or what originally brought you to composting is to grow a more beautiful garden. Lowering that landfill waste, lowering emissions, lightening your rubbish bin, getting some of that food stuff out of the trash, preserving our resources. So when we, protect organic matter, especially food, from the landfill, when we compost it, we're preserving not only the water that grew that food or made it, but the human power, the energy, the transfer, the time, so much resource goes into our food production. And then, one of the best ones, once you get good at it, it's kind of like having a superpower. So compost, just to put us all on the same page, compost is a natural process that breaks down the once living materials into nutrient-dense, living organic matter and humus. So when we're talking about that black gold, or that beautiful earthy, compost that we're trying to make, we're in our backyards trying to replicate what nature just does, right? Without any influence from us, in any forest and any natural cycle, things break down and decompose. And the most important thing, I think, that really helps change your perspective around composting to make compost possible starts with those microorganisms and those macroorganisms. And we're going to talk a lot about microorganisms. And if I was going to rename this to, this composting talk to another title, it'd probably be it's all about microbes. So once we have our little life that's helping break things down and decompose, there's really 4 main ingredients that make composting possible. Got to have water, got to have oxygen, have to have browns or our carbon source, and then we have to have nitrogen or our green source. Let's back down the cake a little bit as we're baking, and come back to our good fellows, our soil food web. I would certainly be remiss to not at least toss this out to you about so much life that is happening in our backyard, in our soils, and what we're trying to promote in our compost piles. So basically in a backyard bin, a tumbler, whatever you're working with, we're trying to nurture this soil food web ecosystem. And what really helped me go from abysmal composter to successful composter was when I started thinking about really composting as microbe farming. And when I focus on what the microbes in my compost need and what the macro decomposers in my soil need, it really helped me focus more on the environment they needed to be successful to thrive, and not just, the physical things I was adding to my compost pile, like grass clippings and leaves and, whatever I was pulling out of the fridge. So three important players here that we want to give some time and energy to. Number one, actinomycetes. So these bacteria are going to be the ones that are really breaking down the tough stuff. And they give compost and soil that really earthy, lovely smell. And when they're breaking these things down, they make those nutrients become bioavailable to plants and to soil. Fungi are molds or yeast that break down the complex stuff. Typically, they're chewing on the things that are already dead and decaying, but they work in all kinds of ways. And there's an immensely diverse category to just be like, oh, the fungi. There's a lot going on in that world. And then, of course, the big one, our bacteria. These are going to be our powerhouse microbes that not only bring the heat, quite literally, but they can heat your compost pile up to kill pathogens and weed seeds. But they're so diverse when we're focusing on nourishing a compost pile that they can eat nearly everything. And odds are there is a composting style that works best for you or can work best for you. And that goes back to a little bit of the why I asked you to think about. I'm certainly not here to say that there's only one type of composting that is best or better than. I am a big believer in the best composting system for you is the one that you're able to do successfully. So as we're doing the 30,000 foot overview here in a moment of different styles of composting, just know that, your goal and your time, your space, that's going to be really influential of the style of composting that you continue to do or that you start to do. So to start with some of the overview that we're thinking about, you have maybe heard or you yourself use terms like active piles, hot piles, cold piles, or passive piles. So to give you some insider language, if you don't have this already, when folks say a hot pile, they're typically talking about some kind of active composting system. So active is like, you might be living and breathing composting a little bit. You are hands-on, you are out there tending to maybe a couple different stalls of composting. You are temping those piles, you are balancing their mixtures, you're reading temperatures, you're turning them. And active hot piles can go faster. Those hot temperatures help things break the bacteria, help those break things down quicker and at a faster pace. And when you're hot composting, you can be churning out finished compost piles, depending on your climate and your feedstock, in about 4 to 6 months. That's pretty darn good. Passive composting or cold composting, and I think this is where most gardeners start, where you're just kind of like adding things to a pile in your yard and, kicking it around every few weeks and hoping that you have some finished compost in a year, which is my situation at least, so maybe I'm making some assumptions. But passive or cold composting, this is not a pile that's heating up. You're maybe adding things to it occasionally, maybe burying some food scraps into it. It's at the corner of your yard, and you're happy, when you have finished compost in, 1 to 2 to even 3 years. So just some language around active, passive, hot, and cold. And I will say here too, before I go forward, active, passive, hot, cold, this could take the shape not just of 3 foot by 3 foot composting stalls. It can be the hot bin. You see a picture on the screen of the plastic tumbler there. It could be a true tumbler where you're rotating scraps through a raised off the ground pile. It could be something you assemble. It could be a bioreactor where you have, tubes with holes allowing for aeration. So this is to say that you can get as deep and as complicated, and I mean that in a positive way, into composting as you want. And I think that also means there's permission to just do a passive pile where you're diverting some food scraps and some waste and still going at a pace that works for you. So some like it hot, but some like it indoors. Vermicomposting is certainly a method of composting that You get to see the macro decomposers at work breaking down food scraps indoors. And just like microbes are worms, especially our red wigglers, as common in vermicomposting, they're going to be most comfortable at temperatures you yourself are likely comfortable. So it's really important that with vermicomposting bins and bokashi composting bins, more on that in a minute, that you are not storing those outdoors in direct sun, in very cold garages. Those worms in vermicomposting, they really need to be above about 55 degrees to be thriving. And I would say ideal temperatures between high 60s to high 70s is really the sweet spot. So as a vermicomposter, you're adding your chopped up food scraps, you're feeding them those food scraps, you're checking the moisture, you're making sure their bedding is sufficient, and you're harvesting finished worm castings or worm poop in about every 3 to 6 months. So again, vermicomposting, very specialized. I've been a worm composter. Garden of Odds, our business, we were selling red wigglers for a little bit last summer. We've since narrowed just because it's just the two of us doing this business. Love worm composting. It is absolutely an art. And there's so much to go and learn about all these styles. But if you're thinking about or you already are a worm composter, it's kind of like having a pet. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about styles that'll work for you. Bokashi composting. So all that is to say, at least for me in my composting journey with my backyard, my garden, and the way that we eat food, bokashi kind of became the best, style for us and our goals. Mostly passive. You have a bucket that lives indoors with you that you add your food scraps to. You sprinkle bokashi bran or bokashi flakes. Garden of Oz makes upcycled bokashi. And those bokashi bran or upcycled bokashi is just an inoculated substrate where we are putting beneficial microbes on those little carbon sprinkles. In our case, it's a grain chaff that we're diverting from the landfill. And when we add those little microbe flakes onto our food scraps in a bucket, those microbes wake up, say it's dinner time, and begin to inoculate that food and kind of grow out a bacteria colony of beneficial organisms. It's mostly passive because you add your food scraps when it's convenient for you. Your tasks become, adding your food scraps, adding bokashi, letting that bucket ferment in an anaerobic condition. And we're going to go a little bit more into this later, harvesting it in a way that works for you, and then finishing it. What I love about bokashi composting in my climate, which is zone 5, we have weather extremes. And typically, by most comparisons, zone 5 is a pretty short season. I can get finished usable compost in about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on my ideal ambient temperatures, as opposed to, 6 months to a year or more. So our 30,000 foot overview of kind of the different players in the game, different styles, that is to say, composting is flexible. You can really focus on what your goals are and start from that why and work out to figure out how are you going to do this and what are you going to do. And really asking yourself what's reasonable and accessible for you. So really grounding yourself in that why. So I'm going to pause there for a second, kind of based on these different styles of composting. In our chat, just kind of curious, what are you doing right now? What are you curious about doing? What are you exploring? Go ahead and share with us if it's convenient. What are you kind of most interested in right now, or what are you doing? And at any given time, I think we've got an active pile, a passive pile. We don't have worms going right now. I have in-bed worms. And then we are always doing bokashi. And yeah, my backyard's like a graveyard / active yard of different composting operations. Yay, worm farms. Love worms. Worms are great. Tumblers, passive yard pile. I feel like every gardener has the passive pile. I'm just going to put this here. It'll break down when it breaks down. Got some bokashi newbies. Love it. Active in bokashi. Awesome. Great. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, dump it. This is so this idea of like kind of trench composting or digging the hole and letting the earth do the rest. That might be like the piece de resistance of passive, where you just collect your food scraps, dig a big hole, mix it, and dump it. I love it. So, just even in our chat, so many different methods, so much flexibility. It really comes down to what your goals are, what space you have. and what makes sense for you. Thanks for sharing. I love seeing what people are doing. All right, fundamentals. So the basic recipe, for your outdoor pile, active, passive, whatever, as you're blending materials together, having at least 2 parts browns to every 1 part nitrogen or green. So when we say browns, we're talking about the carbon source. This could be your leaves, your wood chips. Wood chips are my absolute MVP carbon input. More on that later. I know I keep saying more on later, but really it's coming up. Shredded paper, shredded cardboard. Those browns are going to help balance the nitrogen and the moisture and give the bacteria out in your natural environment time to flourish, grow, find energy sources, and of course shelter too. So this is full stop. Where most people get into trouble with their active piles, they're out of balance. They've got 3 parts nitrogen and greens to 1 part or no browns, and they get a gross, soupy, anaerobic, stinky mess. Some composting experts say as high as 10 parts carbon to every 1 part nitrogen. That's a little more than we have done. I'll sometimes do 3 to 1. That can be a really great starting point, especially when you're processing bokashi biopulp out of the bucket. At a minimum, absolute minimums, 2 to 1. So if you've got a 5-gallon bucket of greens, you're adding 10 gallons of your browns. Other solves most of your problems, chopping up your waste. This is something that takes a little more activity for some folks, but cutting up your food waste, cutting up your yard waste into 2-inch pieces, or rule of thumb, about that big, creates an optimal surface contact to let those microbes that you're really focused on taking care of, right? This little microbe farm that you're making for speedy breakdown and speedy decomposition. Another challenge, especially in my climate up here in the dry Front Range, is keeping your pile moist. Where there is water, there is life. And so where there isn't water, there can't be life. So making sure your compost pile, your tumbler, even your static passive piles, making sure they do have enough moisture is key to keeping your microbes productive and surviving. So a good tip here is that your compost should always be moist, like a well-wrung out sponge. We don't want to drown the pile. More is not always better. Our microbes do need oxygen. The browns that we add to our pile, they also create airspace for those microbes. And all of this is to say this composting fundamental of 2 to 1 browns, chop your waste, water it, is aerobic composting. So when we're doing this, we're making sure there's lots of oxygen coming into that pile to sustain and feed those microorganisms. Anaerobic, of course, is the absence of oxygen, which is going to be important when we talk about bokashi. And then finally, the recommendation for really speeding up your piles and getting that hot active pile is a diversity and variety of food types or feedstocks that you're adding into that compost. So you get lots of different things that lots of different microbes can chow down on and enjoy. And I will add here that there are certainly minimums you can do that produce fabulous compost. So as we're talking about different feedstocks here in a moment, maybe you have a great source of just leaves from your neighborhood and pulp from the juice shop. That can make fabulous compost. So those are just the minimums as we're talking about these 1 parts to 2 parts and so on. So thinking about other materials that you might draw on for your composting. Rodale Composting Institute says that you will be able to find more food stock or more feedstock than you can possibly know what to do with just within 5 miles of your home. I'm inclined to believe that. If you're like, I just don't know where I'm going to have enough waste. Once you start looking, once you put the word out, you're not going to have to go very far. So types of greens here that give us great nitrogen content, grass clippings, just check and make sure it hasn't been treated with chemicals, fruits and veggies, coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are such a great feedstock. And even though they are brown, they're a fabulous source of nitrogen. Your yard trimmings, your food scraps that have been bokashi-fied, teas that's left over from your teas, and that's going to give your microbes food and moisture. Your carbon source are your browns, wood chips. Like I said, that's my MVP, love wood chips. Propped up branches, your paper tea bags. Be careful with tea bags. There are lots of tea bags out there that actually have plastic components, to the point where a lot of the curbside compost haulers we know no longer even accept tea bags because there's just too great a risk of contamination from microplastics. So bulk tea is a great way to go, or triple check that your tea bag is actually a paper tea bag. I know it's a bummer. Leaves, of course, are probably tied with wood chips, just like very, 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 very nearly second place. Having your leaves from your yard or your neighborhood or your community. Chopped up straw, sawdust, same warning there with sawdust as well. Make sure you know the woodworker or the mill. You don't want to inadvertently have like poly-based glues coming into your pile, just regular, normal, untreated sawdust, and then paper products. So that's going to give your microbes that moisture retention, that oxygen, that fluffy nature, some additional energy and shelter source. So ideal recipes, just our minimums. When your pile goes out of balance, if you have too much, it's usually too much nitrogen. That's when things get sticky. They can become sloppy, a mess, and usually just adding browns will solve most of your problems, but every situation is a little different. Where are you going to find your greens? Browns are typically what I think of are harder to come by depending on the season. But just to give you some ideas for your grass clippings, your coffee grounds, your scraps, if you put the word out in your community that you're a drop site, or if you just go and talk to your local coffee shop, you will be amazed at how quickly you will have sources of nitrogen of green coming in. And that's even just not considering, your own food waste or your own food scraps in your household. If you're a cook like we are, I frequently just marvel at the food scraps I create just cooking. So being able to compost really cuts down on that waste. And a note on coffee grounds, my wife and I, a summer or two ago, just partnering with one coffee shop, we diverted 2,500 pounds of coffee grounds, just the two of us, in one summer. I mean, your coffee shops want to give that to you. It's such a great feedstock. And we produced fabulous compost with just coffee grounds and wood chips at a 3-to-1 ratio. So if you are struggling for the nitrogen source, you're looking for some more feedstock, coffee grounds are fabulous. And then I want to do a quick shout out here. You could become a drop site if you're really trying to ramp up, or you're looking for a place to drop your food scraps. These two websites, peels.app and makesoil.org, are ways that you can connect with people in your community, or you can become a drop site to allow people to bring their food waste to you. And I do want to give a special shout out to peels.app real quickly. If you're in the community of composters, you maybe have heard of sharewaste.org or .com. They recently just stopped being a website. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but peels.app just recently launched. We're not affiliated with them. It's a totally free service. I am just excited that something is filling that gap that has been created. And so far, it looks like a very, very solid resource and a really good website or app to check out. So it's just launched. Those little dots actually in Colorado are all in Fort Collins. So that's pretty cool to see people working on. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, back to the microbes a little bit. So we've got our ideal ratios. We know what our feedstocks are. We know what we're doing kind of to compost. What we hear all the time is like, I want hot compost. Or a question somebody asked in our registration was, is it safe to add weeds and weed seeds to my compost pile? And like most things in life, it depends. So let's talk about the active pile, right? That hot pile that we want to get to. There are bacteria that thrive in that high heat, the thermophilic bacteria. And you'll see that after our pile gets made, we have a big enough quantity of materials, typically 3 cubic feet, 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. Our mesophiles, our mesophilic bacteria, begin to move in and thrive. And then as more bacteria move in and develop and grow, our thermophilic bacteria begin to get to work, and they produce heat as the byproduct of what they're doing, of their processes. And it's through that heat that we can actually not only sanitize and combat pathogens, but kill weed seeds. So this is something that you're likely only going to achieve through a hot composting pile. So active, hands-on, pretty good size pile or space or, bin that you're operating. And then after the hot phase, the thermophilic bacteria begin to wind down. Maybe they've consumed all their food source. And then we move into what's typically called like the curing cycle of that composting, or the maturation phase. And then the mesophiles move back in to finish. So like those fungi come back, those other mesophiles break down the big crunchy stuff. I don't know, I like chunky compost, I like mulchy compost, but most people will take that cured, mature product, sift it, and then end up with that black gold that you saw in those videos. So this whole process, remember, this is taking months of that hot compost, of active tending to. And I do want to talk just quickly, and again, this is an ocean of information that we're kind of sailing across at the moment. So really encourage you to dig deeper into these. But our purpose today was trying to give you some of those tips and tricks and overviews. Heat and time when it comes to different pathogens, but especially different weed varieties and weed species. Different weeds can withstand different temperatures. So the magic temperature you usually hear from active composters is you want to get above 131, 141 degrees to really kill off those weed seeds and have pathogenic destruction, kill off those pathogens. But looking at this chart from Texas A&M, depending on the type of weed, I mean, it has different thresholds. So to just directly answer the question from the registration about, is it safe to add weeds to your compost? I would say if it is a categorized noxious weed, so USDA noxious weed, probably best to not add it to your pile. They can be so hard to kill, and they can be so tough, that if you don't destroy their root, if you don't, chop them up well, and even sometimes chopping them up, they can still propagate. It's really kind of a marvel. But for the most part, if you're like, no, I'm committed to hot composting, I want to get into that, like you can kill off weed seed. I would just caution you to avoid the noxious weeds. And then with bokashi composting, which we're going to get into, the process of bokashi actually mitigates pathogens throughout that process, even without getting it really, really hot. But with that hot compost pile, to give you some more tips with this, if you're like desperately trying to level up your hot composting, mistakes people forget to do or tips that you should do, aerate it. So once you start to kind of get into those 100-degree temperatures, that 120, it's just kind of getting hot on its own, you'll eventually see it start to backslide and cool off a little bit. That means that you probably want to turn it. You probably want to add some water or moisture to it. You want to get that air into it through that mixing, and that's going to allow those microbes to get contact with more of your feedstock and then start working again and getting hot again. So for some big commercial piles, I mean, they'll stay hot for a long time. But for a backyard compost pile, you want to have, temperatures above 141 for at least 3 days, checking on it. So you need a thermometer. You want to, make sure you're temping it from different places. And let me just see if I can play this little clip again. The sides of those piles, if you just leave it alone, the sides will dry out. So mixing it also allows you to put that dry stuff back in the middle, maybe hose it down, maintain your balance and mixture of materials, and maintain that moisture. Critical mass. So to have that hot compost, you're also going to want to have a large enough pile. And I mentioned that a few times, but that really is the recommendation, for hot active piles, that 3 cubic foot, to have enough there to really have enough energy production, enough feedstock for those microbes. So if the hands-on, get the pitchfork and turn things every 3 or 4 days to keep your pile hot doesn't appeal to you, and I will say, once you get a taste of it, it does become a little addictive to see your pile get hot and feel that. But hands-off composting, cold composting is certainly successful and can be done really, really well. So a really simple way to post a static pile or a cold pile in your backyard, certainly you can just pile things together, but you'll find that the bigger things take a really long time to decompose. So cutting them up is going to be the first thing you can do to help that pile go faster. And then I'm going to show you a diagram of the lasagna method. It's exactly what it sounds like, where we alternate layers of greens and browns to expedite that decomposition, help feed those microbes, but also, get a little bit faster than 3 years of a cold pile, actually see some decomposition in a year. I will say, if you're passive composting or you're cold composting, avoid weeds. You're just not going to have that kill off temperature for that seed or for those seeds, or even like tossing the pumpkin in and all the pumpkin seeds germinate. Same thing. Avoid meat and cheese in all these piles, especially if you're in an area you have to worry about like rodents or raccoons. They're going to get into that. But I will say in this diagram of the lasagna method, your greens stay really central to the pile in about a 1 or 2 inch layer, and then you're actually kind of capping it with those browns. So in any compost pile, your food shouldn't really be visible. It should be buried, it should be mixed. Even in my active piles, I'll make sure to cover it with a layer of browns or of wood chips or whatever carbon source I'm using. And then with this lasagna method, after you get your pile together, you can certainly mix it up to speed it up later on. That's totally optional. You can keep adding to it. The bottom of your lasagna pile will decompose faster because it's older. So you can always pull that out and then toss what's not finished back in. But in terms of managing your cold pile, this gets a little more active, but still not quite as hands-on or not quite as active as a hot pile. So I have we'll email out to the group some resources, and I have a handout specifically on lasagna method that I'll be sure to share with you. Even just thinking about wow, I just need to do something different with my compost. Having some strategy to your cold piles will make a big difference in how quickly it can break down. And at least for me, once we started bokashi composting about 5 years ago, after many seasons of just kind of sub-average composting. There's looking back on it, there was so much I was doing wrong. But one of the big things I wasn't doing well originally was just tossing things into a bin and assuming it had everything it needed to decompose. Having a little bit of a plan, a knowledge on the ideal ratios is going to go a long way as you're trying to level up your compost. I will speak a little bit about vermicomposting and worms, just because we probably were vermicomposting longer than any other style compost we were doing. But some advice for worm composting, make sure it's in a protected location. Like I was saying, worms are pretty tender to temperatures. You'll plug into Google or into other subreddits and help forums like what's wrong with my worms. And a big part of vermicomposting, I think, is troubleshooting for newbies and figuring out ideal temperatures, ideal location, keeping bedding fresh for the wormies, making sure that your food is buried sufficiently, that your food's chopped up enough. I'm a big believer in vermicomposting, but you do want to make sure you have your plan and your research done before you basically bring a pet into your home to really take care of those worms well. I will say coconut coir makes a great bedding substrate, as does shredded paper, shredded cardboard, but we've been really happy with coconut coir as a mixture in that as well. People think that vermicomposting is a little less hands-off. I think it's actually kind of active because you are monitoring these living things. You can really see your macro decomposers at work. You're feeding them, you're checking moisture, you're making sure their bedding's good, and then you're harvesting worm poop or worm castings every couple of months. There's not much better for your garden than vermicompost. That's if you're thinking about you bringing worms in as part of your composting, that would certainly be a good one. And worms actually do play nice with bokashi. We have a blog post about vermicomposting and bokashi and how you can bring that into that process if you want to deep dive that information, but we've done it with success. A lot of people do it with success. It's a great addition to a home composting kit. So all that is to say, bokashi for us has become kind of this umbrella composting strategy that our other methods fall under. So what we love about bokashi and what I love about bokashi is it's pretty much all of our food waste, including meat, dairy, bones, oil, fat, cooked or raw. All of that can go safely into a bokashi bucket. You want to make sure, like any composting, that you're cutting your pieces and your food scraps smaller. We said rule of thumb, I really think like an inch for bokashi is ideal. The smaller the better because microbes can get that surface area contact. You add your food scraps to your prepared bokashi bucket or bin. You sprinkle on that upcycled bokashi that's introducing those beneficial microorganisms that are essential if you put food waste in a bucket and put a lid on it. So if you've ever smelled like rotten, putrid food, that true anaerobic composting or bacteria smells terrible. But that's what's so magical about the bokashi is by bringing those beneficial microorganisms directly to that food waste, we create that fermented food scrap that becomes inoculated with those beneficial microorganisms. So you add your food scraps, your bokashi, you squish it all down and put a lid on it and keep it airtight. The biggest mistake we see folks make, maybe two, but the first one with bokashi buckets is it's too wet. They've added liquids or their food scraps are a little too moist. And then to balance that out, they need to add more bokashi bran or upcycle bokashi or something a little bit drier in that bucket to help balance it back out again. So don't be surprised after you fill up your bokashi bucket and then you let it fully ferment for 2 weeks, and you open it and there's just a bucket of food scraps there that are now pickled and kind of, yeasty, vinegary smelling. You still need to finish it, and there's endless opportunities for how you choose to finish it. Tumblers, stalls, hot bins, a soil factory. But I think I've heard people before be like, well, wait, there wasn't soil in my bucket at the end of it. Well, it's like, yeah, that's just your food scraps. You have to have that whole recipe to finish that composting. So bokashi, I would say, mostly passive in terms of day-to-day activity, adding your food scraps to a bucket, adding bokashi, letting it sit and fully ferment after the bucket's been filled, harvesting it, and then deciding how you want to use your now rich, nutrient-dense, and living food scraps. So deep dive time into bokashi. Bokashi is a Japanese word. It means fading away in Japanese. Bokashi is unique and special because we can do it in all seasons. It's all food waste. You can have finished compost if you have ideal temperatures in about 6 weeks. I've even done it in as fast as 4 weeks. And then kind of interesting, it's this anaerobic on the first part. So as we're sprinkling our food scraps and we're adding them into our bucket, get that video to start over again, you seal that bucket back up and you're allowing those beneficial anaerobic bacteria to do their thing and to develop and inoculate your food scraps. People in apartments, people in condos, people without yard space can do bokashi composting. It kind of has that similar flexibility as vermicomposting has, where it could be done completely indoors. However, I think bokashi is at its best when it has access to a garden, to an outdoor space, or some kind of outdoor pile. And then, of course, of note, in my water-wise climate, where we struggle with drought, our climate is really, really dry. Zone 5, Fort Collins is technically like high plains desert. Not having to water a compost pile in the same way is a huge win for how we like to manage our water usage. So the overview of bokashi, you have your system, your bucket. It could be a 5-gallon bucket that you've upcycled. It could be a bokashi buddy that we produce and make. It could be some other bokashi kit. You're adding your food scraps. You're sprinkling on that upcycled bokashi that brings the microbes right to your food source. And then once your container is full, you're going to put that lid on, maybe write the date on it, and let it sit for at least 10 days, but we say kind of at minimum 2 weeks. Now, during that 2-week full fermentation time, you're letting the top part of your bucket catch up to the bottom part. So the entire bucket becomes completely fermented. Now, after that 2-week fermentation, you choose how you want to finish this bucket of bokashi food scraps. It can go in the hot bin, the tumbler, your active pile. We know folks who have come to bokashi because they're trying to do hot composting, and you have such rich nitrogen food that's inoculated with all these great bacteria that when they hit a pile or they hit a bin, they get hot very quickly, which is very appealing to a lot of home gardeners. You can trench it, put it right in your garden bed. If you're a low or no till person though, you could also, if you got a spot in your yard, like someone mentioned, that you just dig a hole, drop it in and cover it really well. You can do that too. Anytime you're burying food scraps, we recommend that you dig it down pretty deep to make sure it's fully covered and hiding from your curious backyard dogs or neighborhood raccoon. But there's some finished bokashi compost there at the end of your garden-ready living compost. So over there on the left, I'm really, really proud of the upcycled bokashi we make, because if you are a bokashi composter and you're buying bokashi bran, most of the bokashi bran on the market is a wheat bran basis. Some bokashi is rice hulls. And, as we were coming to bokashi and buying the wheat brands that were out there, and then tiptoeing our way into making it, we were really dedicated to finding a byproduct of something, that we wanted to use something that was already destined for the landfill, that we could bring into this process. Because it's composting. We're already going out of our way to preserve our resources and preserve our food. We felt that the bokashi brand should be doing that too. And then through a series of happy accidents, we have this gorgeous byproduct from a local malt house here in Fort Collins that we have a close relationship with that is 100% landfilled, this byproduct. It can't be used for animal feed. It's not composted generally. It goes straight to landfill. And it makes the perfect bokashi substrate. So that is the basis of our upcycled bokashi. We're really proud that it is 100% diverted. It is clean. It actually comes through a kiln, so it's pasteurized, and it just has a fantastic fluffy texture. What you're seeing in a couple of those videos there is we're sprinkling our bokashi on. So you have your bokashi, you add it to your food scraps, and then that bucket there on the right is after 2 weeks, where you see some of that white blooming, a little bit of that yeast, a little bit of that fungi kind of emerge. It's like a perfectly balanced bokashi bucket. You might see a little white mold. The presence of air can feed some of that. You can see that substrate kind of emerge, that little fungal bloom kind of emerge. Sometimes you won't see any white blooms of anything on a bokashi bucket. It really depends on what is in your bucket, how good you were at squishing it down, or how much airspace was in there, and what else you've put in it. But initially, our main cultured bacteria are lactobacillus species, but there's also some photosynthetic bacteria, phototropic bacteria, and some other special yeasts and decomposers that make this cultured blend really powerful, and just a workhorse for our soil and our gardens. So when we're talking about mitigating for pathogens, this consortium of bacteria in our effective microorganisms make that possible. So again, fermentation is finished. I just want to give you an example of, let's say, you're adding it to a tumbler. So we take our 5 gallons of bokashi biopulp, we add it to the tumbler, we get 10 gallons of leaves or wood chips, and then we blend it all up together in that tumbler. Same idea in a hot bin. This is actually at a nonprofit site that we partner really closely with that I'm going to talk about more here in a moment. Dumping the whole bucket in there, adding a couple layers of wood chips, mixing it beforehand in those hot bins is what their companies recommend. We've experienced both ways and been successful, but I will say mixing ahead of time, if you're doing a big haul, I think is always a little bit better on just getting materials combined. So let's talk about that nonprofit. Coincidentally, also organized and run by an educator in my community who I didn't know until both of our booths were next to each other at Earth Day 2 years ago. Sproutin' Up, our local nonprofit, is all about supporting and offering food access to our under-resourced neighborhoods in North Fort Collins. These are primarily working class neighborhoods. They're primarily immigrant populations. They primarily serve and support one mobile home community. What's so great about Sproutin' Up is they have programs for anybody who wants to come and join them, but that access and that economic and environmental justice is really supporting that neighborhood community that's just down the road. So it's food literacy, it's farming and sustainable education, also job skills. So the teenagers can actually come and be interns at Sproutin' Up and get paid. And that's what really drew us here, that something really special was happening to see a nonprofit financially compensating teens who are already from, lower socioeconomic families. Really, really impressive. So we started talking, and Sproutin' Up wanted to do more with bokashi composting. So as we were chatting, we developed a pilot program of a bokashi pilot for 10 of their families in their mobile home community that were serviced by Sproutin' Up. We had 10 families come and join us for a demo. They learned all about bokashi composting. Most of them had never composted before, and none of them had ever heard of bokashi composting before. And through some madness that had struck us, we began the pilot in late October. So we're going into winter in Colorado, which most people would tell you is not like ideal composting temperatures. And of course, through bokashi, we were able to tell our participants, you can use all of your food waste. We trained teen interns to be the compost managers. So we were keeping an eye on things as kind of the private business, the small business supporting the operation. But it was really teens who got to learn how to manage and do this and run pickups in this small community. And of course, the benefit of not having open piles, we used several large hot bins, people not needing prior experience, and of course, not needing electricity to run, a pilot like this. So what really worked for us is that wood chips. That's what we had access to on the farm. We had a lot of arborists who just dropped their wood chips there for Sproutin' Up to use. So we mix about 3 parts of wood chips for every 1 part of bokashi biopulp or bokashified food scraps. And then the teens would add it similarly as to this video showing you mixing it and adding it into the hot bin. And what was really amazing, because we'd seen it on small scales, we'd seen it as home composters, but to scale up was something that we were really excited about. We were able to produce more than 100 gallons of finished compost in like 3.5, 4 months through the winter through this process, just with 10 families. So at the end of our pilot, and we're going to be expanding this community operation, we had diverted with just 10 families more than 500 pounds of food waste from the landfill during this program. We were able to prevent more than 2,000 pounds of methane gas emissions that would have been created through just rotting and anaerobic composting in the landfill. Again, we made more than 100 gallons of finished bokashi compost in just that pilot, and we were able to compensate those team compost managers more than $1,200 in income for their time. I mean, just, seeing Bokashi's ability to scale and scale up, that anybody can come to it, anybody can learn how to do it. It's, simple enough that teenagers, and hey, I'm a high school teacher, like I know what teens are capable of, which is quite a lot, but seeing young people be able to manage this, it's a really approachable method to scaling up your composting, whether it's in your backyard, if it's in your community, or you're just trying to get more people in your break room to get on board with diverting some of that food waste. So we're really, really proud of the work we've done with Sproutin' Up. We have a little bit of time, and this is where you're going to come back in. So if you've got some ideas to share in our chat here in a moment, be ready. But of course, the most important thing we can do to prevent food waste is to prevent the waste in the first place. Some things that have really been a game changer for us as a household, our freezer being our number one preventative method of wasting food, and a dehydrator. So most people have access to, if not all people have access to, a freezer. Dehydrator might be a little taller order. Between those two devices, I'll just kind of give you the life cycle of some veggie scraps. So in our freezer, we always keep a bag of veggie scraps, and that is just like onion peels, garlic, potato peels, carrots, whatever we're cooking with. We'll gather those into a bowl and then add them to the bag in the freezer. Once the bag in the freezer is full, we'll make a broth with that. We'll toss it in the slow cooker, put it on a pot in the stove, season it to taste, and save that broth for a tasty soup or an upcoming meal. But here's where we get a little wackier. We will actually then strain out the scraps from the soup that we made from the scraps that we already saved. We'll squeeze out as much moisture as we can, and then we'll actually dehydrate the scraps that we already made a broth with. And then we'll take those out of the dehydrator, and we'll blend those for a veggie powder. And then we go on to use that veggie powder as a seasoning tool, as a soup enhancer, a flavor enhancer. Lately, we've been mixing it with garlic and paprika and salt as a popcorn topper. And it has tasted great. It's just like a major commercial snack if you've ever had a certain veggie flavored puffed snack. So that alone, just thinking about like how we can stretch some of those in very practical ways, huge difference for us in a household. And then, that is actually zero waste. We make teas from lots of peels. We also, that dehydrator helps us powder things that are about to go bad. So we made a big batch of powdered lemons and blended it up. And now we have just on-demand lemon powder, which is great in all kinds of things. Last season, when we were canning too many pounds of peaches from our local community, we saved the peach pits and we tried making a syrup, and it turned out lovely. Turns out there's lots of flavor still on those peach pits. So using some of those scraps to make syrups and other flavor enhancers. And I think the hardest one that takes some time to get better at is just cooking at home and meal planning, which has not come naturally to me. I really have had to learn to cook the last, 15 years of adulthood. It wasn't something that came naturally to me. I was very unpleasant to share a kitchen with early on, learning to cook, and now just being able to cook and look at the fridge and find ways to put the stir fry together with whatever we have in the fridge, and meal planning and staying true to our meal plan. Because the bummer truth is the most sustainable thing we can do is probably eat the food in our fridge instead of going out that night. And then last but definitely not least is connecting with and finding local food rescues in your community. We have one here locally called Vindicate Food Rescue. Their whole mission is preventing food waste. An example of some of the impact they do so much, but we had 40,000 pounds of blueberries that were overaged in our grocery stores here in Northern Colorado. It's not an exaggeration, tens of thousands of pounds of blueberries. And through their organization, they're able to capture that waste, divert it to their facility, and people can just come and get it and walk through Vindicate like kind of a free grocery store and pay on demand for donations. So I know up and down the Front Range, we have some fabulous organizations doing food rescue. Odds are good there's one in your community, or maybe there's one that's just waiting to come together and happen. So composting in a nutshell, hopefully some tips and tricks preventing that waste even before we need to talk about composting it. We have just a little bit of time, but we probably realistically don't have much time for a Q&A. So I'll probably ask if you have those questions, please reach out and connect, via email, on social media. I'm happy to hang back for a couple of minutes if you want to chat real quick. But apologies, we won't have more time for a Q&A today. But thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about your food waste, learning a little bit more about composting, about bokashi composting. Really hope you'll stay in touch. And again, if you want to hang back and chat one-on-one, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, I know we're right around the end of our hour. So thanks for being here. We also, just as a thank you, just for folks who are here, we do have a 20% off coupon to use on gardenofozco.com. We'll email that out as well, but it's just FWPW20. And I think that expires Sunday. We have some Earth Day stuff coming up later this month too, and we will be celebrating the anniversary of our small business. So please stay in touch. Thank you so much for being here, and have a fabulous rest of your spring. Thank you so much.